Imagine opening your banking app one morning expecting the usual knot in your stomach, expecting that familiar moment of hesitation where you almost don't want to look because you already know the number will disappoint you. But instead of dread, something strange happens and you find yourself smiling at the screen because, for the first time in your life, money isn't something chasing you from behind like a shadow you can't escape, but something quietly standing beside you, like a loyal ally that gives you space to breathe and think clearly about your future. Now imagine the exact moment when that shift happens, the precise invisible line where financial stress slowly dissolves and gets replaced by calm control, because contrary to what the internet loves to scream about with flashy thumbnails promising that $1 million is the only way to feel rich, the real psychological turning point happens much earlier. Almost nobody talks about it. That number is $20,000. Not a mansion, not a luxury lifestyle, not private jets or exotic vacations every month, but a simple number that quietly changes the way your brain processes every financial decision you make from that moment forward. Because money isn't just math, money is psychology. And once you understand how psychology interacts with numbers, you start to see why some people slowly build unstoppable wealth, while others run the same exhausting financial loop for decades, without realizing the game they're playing is completely different. My name is Nick, and if you're someone who wants to understand how wealth actually works beneath the surface, instead of blindly following generic advice that rarely changes anything in the real world, then stay with me for a moment, because what you're about to hear may completely change the way you think about money starting today. Let me ask you something honestly. When you picture someone becoming wealthy, what image appears in your mind first? Maybe you imagine a trust fund kid who never worried about bills because money was always there waiting. Maybe you imagine someone grinding through endless overtime shifts, slowly stacking dollars one by one while sacrificing every pleasure in life. But the truth is, wealth almost never grows in a straight, predictable line the way most people assume. Instead, wealth behaves more like physics. There are invisible thresholds, invisible barriers, invisible points where everything suddenly accelerates. And the first real barrier most people will ever face is $20,000. It sounds small, almost unimpressive, but that number separates to completely different financial realities. On one side are people living paycheck to paycheck, where every unexpected expense feels like a sudden storm that can sink the entire boat. On the other side are people who finally have enough momentum that their financial life begins to move forward without constant panic. Think about pushing a massive boulder up a hill. At the beginning, the stone barely moves, even though you are exhausting yourself trying to push it forward inch by inch, while gravity fights against every ounce of effort you put in. Your muscles burn, your patience wears thin. You start wondering if the hill is even climbable. But something magical happens once you finally reach the peak. The moment the boulder crosses the top of the hill, gravity flips from your enemy to your ally, and suddenly the same rock that felt impossible to move begins rolling forward on its own. That hill is your first $20,000. Before that number, everything feels like pushing uphill. After that number, momentum begins to work for you. But here is the twist most people never expect. The change is not just financial. The change is neurological. When your savings are close to zero, your brain operates in survival mode. Every single decision passes through a filter of fear. Can I afford this? What if something breaks? What if my job disappears? What if one bad month destroys everything? Your brain cannot think about growth while it is busy protecting you from immediate danger. Trying to plan wealth while living paycheck to paycheck is like trying to design a dream vacation while your house is actively on fire. Your mind simply does not have the bandwidth for long-term strategy. But something remarkable happens when that emergency cushion grows large enough. The moment you cross that $20,000 threshold, your brain experiences something rare in modern financial life: breathing room. Instead of asking how you will survive until the next paycheck, you start asking a completely different question. How can I grow this? That one changing question transforms everything about how you interact with money. Research from Vanguard once revealed that simply having $2,000 in emergency savings increases financial well-being by over 20%. $2,000, less than the price of a laptop, less than the cost of a short vacation. Yet that tiny buffer dramatically changes how secure people feel about their future. Now imagine expanding that buffer to 3 or 6 months of living expenses, which for many people lands somewhere near $20,000. The mental shift becomes enormous, because now life's random surprises stop feeling like disasters and start feeling like manageable inconveniences. Your car breaks down, annoying but fixable. Your laptop dies, frustrating but solvable. Your rent increases, unpleasant but survivable. When you remove the constant fear of financial catastrophe, your brain suddenly gains the freedom to think creatively about opportunities instead of obsessively about threats. And this is where the mathematics begins to quietly work in your favor. Let's imagine you commit to saving $1,000 every month, while investing in a simple diversified portfolio returning around 8% per year. Reaching the first $20,000 takes about 19 months, almost 2 full years of discipline. 2 years of saying no to things you want, 2 years of delaying gratification, 2 years where progress feels slow. But then something fascinating happens. Your second 20,000 does not take another 19 months. It takes closer to 17, because the first 20,000 has quietly joined the workforce. Your money is now working alongside you. By the time you push towards 60,000, the timeline shrinks again. The snowball begins to form, and once your portfolio eventually reaches $400,000, something almost unbelievable occurs. Your investments alone can generate another $20,000 in about 5 months without any extra effort from you. The same amount that once required years of discipline begins appearing automatically through compound growth, and suddenly the impossible becomes inevitable. This is the moment where people often assume wealthy investors must have access to secret financial strategies hidden from the average person. Exclusive hedge funds, private deals, elite opportunities reserved for insiders. But the truth is both simpler and more encouraging. The secret is scale. When you invest $1,000 and it grows 10%, you make $100. When you invest $10,000 and it grows the same 10%, you make $1,000. Same strategy, same time, same risk, only the scale changed. This is why 20,000 feels like such a powerful turning point. Before that milestone, investment returns feel small. 10% on $2,000 produces $200, which is nice but hardly life-changing. But 10% on $20,000 produces $2,000. Now the numbers start feeling meaningful. Your money begins whispering the first hints of independence, and that whisper becomes louder every year you allow it to grow. But the most valuable thing you gain from saving $20,000 is not the money itself. It is the identity transformation that happens along the way, because reaching that number proves something extremely important. You have learned to control your money instead of letting your money control you. You tracked your spending. You made sacrifices. You resisted impulsive purchases. You stayed consistent when motivation disappeared. And perhaps most importantly, you discovered that delayed gratification is not punishment. It is power. Once your brain experiences that shift, your entire financial identity changes. You stop thinking like someone barely surviving. You start thinking like someone building something. And when that mindset takes root, opportunities begin appearing everywhere. A friend mentions a business idea that needs early investment. A property appears below market value. A career opportunity requires temporary risk. Before 20,000, those moments pass you by because you simply cannot participate. After 20,000, those same moments become real possibilities you can actually evaluate. This is what people mean when they say money attracts money. Not because the universe rewards wealth magically, but because money creates options, and options create opportunity, and opportunity multiplies wealth. The strange thing about money is that most people spend their entire lives chasing bigger salaries, better opportunities, and more impressive job titles without realizing that the real turning point in their financial life rarely comes from a single dramatic promotion, but instead arrives quietly the moment their savings become large enough to change the way their brain interprets risk, opportunity, and the future itself. Because when you reach that $20,000 milestone, something subtle but powerful begins happening in the background of your daily life, almost like a silent software update inside your mind that rewrites the rules you have been following for years without even realizing it. Before that moment, every financial decision feels heavy, every purchase carries emotional weight, and every unexpected bill feels like a sudden crack, forming in the fragile structure of your monthly survival plan. But once that financial buffer exists, the pressure slowly begins to dissolve and space opens inside your mind for a completely different kind of thinking. Instead of constantly asking how to survive the next month, you begin asking how to improve the next 5 years. And that shift from short-term survival to long-term strategy is where the real transformation begins to unfold. Because wealth building is not just about numbers multiplying inside an investment account, but about the evolution of the person managing those numbers, the slow development of patience, discipline, and perspective that only appears after someone proves to themselves that consistent action can reshape their financial reality. And once you experience that proof firsthand, something fascinating happens to your confidence, because you are no longer operating on blind hope or motivational slogans, but on personal evidence that the system actually works when applied long enough. That realization begins to ripple outward into areas of life that at first glance appear completely unrelated to money, influencing the way you approach your career, your habits, your relationships, and even the risks you are willing to take when new opportunities appear. When someone lives paycheck to paycheck, their world naturally shrinks around immediate needs, because survival demands focus on the present moment. But once a financial cushion exists, the horizon begins expanding and suddenly decisions are no longer limited by fear but guided by strategy. You start noticing things that were invisible before, a skill that could increase your income if you invested time learning it, a side project that could grow into something meaningful, an investment opportunity that once felt out of reach but now feels realistically achievable. These opportunities were always present in the environment around you, but they were hidden behind the fog created by financial stress. Stress consumes mental energy, and mental energy is one of the most valuable resources in the entire process of building wealth. When stress disappears, even partially, your ability to analyze, plan, and execute improves dramatically. And this is why the people earning the same salary can experience completely different financial outcomes over the course of a decade. One person remains trapped in reactive decision-making, constantly responding to emergencies and setbacks. The other person begins operating proactively, designing systems that move their financial life forward without requiring constant attention. The difference between those two paths often begins with a simple emergency fund, large enough to stabilize the psychological environment in which decisions are made. Because once stability enters the picture, a powerful chain reaction begins unfolding. Confidence increases, decision quality improves, opportunities expand, income potential grows, savings accelerate, investments compound, and before long the person who once felt financially fragile begins feeling something entirely different. Control over choices, control over time, control over the direction of their own life. That feeling is incredibly rare in a world where most individuals spend decades trading time for money while hoping circumstances eventually improve on their own. But improvement rarely happens by accident. Improvement is usually the result of systems, habits, and thresholds working together to gradually shift momentum. And momentum is one of the most underestimated forces in personal finance. Because just like a snowball rolling down a mountain, financial progress becomes easier the larger it grows. The early stages require effort, persistence, patience. But once momentum forms, progress begins accelerating almost automatically. This is the phase where many observers suddenly describe someone as lucky or naturally talented with money, even though the truth is far less glamorous. They simply stayed consistent long enough for the mathematics of compounding to begin working in their favor. And compound growth does not only apply to investment accounts. It applies to knowledge. It applies to career skills. It applies to professional relationships. Every year spent improving small areas of life produces results that stack on top of each other in ways that become visible only after several cycles of progress have passed. At first, the results appear small: a slightly larger savings account, a slightly better understanding of investing, a slightly stronger network of professional contacts. But those small improvements begin reinforcing each other until eventually a tipping point arrives where progress begins accelerating much faster than effort alone could explain. This phenomenon is why many financially successful individuals appear to rise suddenly, even though their progress actually began quietly years earlier when nobody was paying attention. And interestingly, the same dynamic works in reverse for people trapped in financial instability. Debt compounds, stress compounds, poor decisions compound, and over time the accumulation of those negative cycles becomes extremely difficult to escape without a major shift in behavior. That is why the first $20,000 plays such a crucial role. It interrupts the negative cycle. It introduces stability. It creates breathing room. And breathing room allows better decisions to emerge. Those better decisions slowly create positive momentum. And positive momentum eventually transforms the entire trajectory of a person's financial life. But here is where things become even more interesting, because the change does not stop with financial strategy alone. Your perception of value begins evolving. When money is scarce, people naturally prioritize immediate gratification because the future feels uncertain. Why sacrifice today for a future that might never arrive? But once stability exists, the future becomes something you can actually plan around. And when the future becomes real, long-term thinking begins influencing everyday decisions. Instead of chasing temporary excitement, you begin searching for lasting value. Instead of reacting emotionally to marketing and social pressure, you begin asking a different question. Is this purchase improving my life or simply distracting me for a moment? That question has enormous power, because most spending decisions in modern society are driven by impulse rather than intention. Advertising systems are designed to trigger emotional responses that bypass logical analysis. And when someone is financially stressed, those triggers become even stronger because emotional relief feels necessary. But a stable financial foundation weakens those triggers. Not completely, but enough to give rational thinking a chance to intervene. And when rational thinking becomes part of the process, spending habits naturally begin aligning with long-term goals. you start noticing that many expensive purchases provide only temporary satisfaction. A new gadget feels exciting for a few days before becoming ordinary. A luxury item impresses others briefly, before fading into the background. But investments behave differently. Investments grow, they accumulate, they produce opportunities, and over time they generate a type of satisfaction that is far deeper than momentary excitement. The satisfaction of progress, the satisfaction of security, the satisfaction of knowing your future is slowly becoming more flexible and more independent with each passing year. And once someone experiences that feeling, it becomes surprisingly addictive, because watching your financial foundation strengthen month after month creates a sense of calm that is difficult to replicate through consumption alone. This is why many financially successful individuals eventually reach a point where spending becomes less interesting than investing, not because they dislike enjoying life, but because they have experienced a unique psychological reward that comes from watching long-term systems quietly improve their circumstances. That reward is subtle, but it is powerful, and it encourages the kind of patience that compound growth requires. Patience is perhaps the most underrated skill in wealth building. Modern culture celebrates speed, instant results, overnight success, but wealth rarely follows that pattern. Wealth behaves more like a tree growing slowly year after year, strengthening its roots beneath the surface long before its branches become visible above ground. The early years are quiet, sometimes frustrating, but every season of growth builds structure that supports greater expansion later. And the moment someone reaches their first meaningful financial milestone, they begin realizing that the journey is not about reaching a single finish line, but about continuously strengthening the system that produces progress. Because systems create consistency, consistency creates momentum, momentum creates results, and results reinforce the behaviors that started the cycle in the first place. This is why the simple act of saving $20,000 has such disproportionate influence over the future. It is not the amount itself, it is the identity that forms while achieving it. You become someone who follows through, someone who plans ahead, someone who builds instead of reacts. And once that identity becomes part of your self-perception, the path toward greater wealth becomes far more natural than it once seemed. Not easy, but natural. And the beautiful irony is that many people spend decades searching for complicated financial secrets, when the most powerful transformation often begins with a surprisingly simple milestone, quietly sitting inside a savings or investment account. A milestone that proves something extremely important, that the person looking back at you in the mirror is capable of building the future they once believed was reserved for someone else. And once someone truly understands this shift, something fascinating begins unfolding in the background of their life, because money stops being a constant source of anxiety and slowly transforms into a strategic tool that can be directed, shaped, and multiplied through decisions that become clearer with every passing month of disciplined action. The moment financial breathing room appears, your brain begins noticing patterns that once felt invisible, patterns in how income flows through your life, patterns in where your money quietly disappears each month, and patterns in the habits that either strengthen or weaken your ability to move forward with intention. When you finally see those patterns clearly, you realize that wealth is rarely the result of one dramatic moment, but rather the product of hundreds of small decisions, quietly stacking on top of each other over time until the final outcome begins to look extraordinary from the outside. You start recognizing that every dollar has potential energy attached to it, because a dollar spent today disappears instantly, while a dollar invested begins a long journey of growth that can multiply itself many times over through patience and compounding. This awareness slowly changes the emotional relationship you have with spending, not in a restrictive or miserable way, but in a thoughtful way, where you begin weighing the long-term impact of decisions that once felt insignificant. Instead of reacting automatically to every desire or impulse, you pause for a brief moment and consider what that same money could become, if given enough time inside an investment account quietly working on your behalf. And strangely enough, that small pause becomes one of the most powerful financial habits a person can ever develop, because it inserts intention between desire and action, allowing logic to participate in decisions that were once driven purely by emotion. Over time, those intentional choices begin accumulating momentum that is difficult for others to understand from the outside, because the progress appears gradual, until suddenly the results become impossible to ignore. Friends may start noticing that you seem calmer when unexpected expenses appear, that you speak about money with confidence rather than stress, and that your decisions about work, housing, and lifestyle seem guided by a long-term vision rather than immediate pressure. This calm confidence does not come from arrogance or luck, but from the quiet knowledge that you have built a foundation capable of absorbing life's unpredictability without collapsing under the weight of it. And once that foundation exists, your entire relationship with time begins to change. because you are no longer forced to exchange every hour of your life for survival, but instead begin using time as a resource to design a future that aligns with your deeper priorities. You begin asking questions that rarely appear in the minds of people stuck in financial survival mode, questions about how you want to spend your energy, which projects genuinely excite you, and what kind of lifestyle would feel meaningful rather than merely impressive. Those questions gradually pull you away from the endless cycle of consumption and comparison that dominates modern culture and guide you toward a quieter, but far more powerful path built around independence, flexibility, and purposeful living. The interesting thing about this shift is that it rarely feels dramatic in the moment, because it unfolds slowly through dozens of subtle realizations that accumulate over time, until one day you suddenly recognize how differently you now think about money compared to the past. You remember the days when every bill felt like a threat, and every purchase required careful mental calculations just to ensure you would survive, until the next paycheck arrived. And then you compare that memory to the present moment where financial decisions feel calmer, more deliberate, and far less emotionally charged because the foundation beneath you has grown strong enough to support long-term thinking. That comparison alone becomes powerful motivation to continue strengthening the systems that created this progress in the first place, because you have experienced firsthand how dramatically your quality of life improves when financial stability enters the picture.